Trust me, I had to change my whole configuration of my phone to prevent my moron East Coast friends from ruining things for me every day.
Okay, Greg, what we're going to do, we did not cover the St. Locash Marauders last week, so we're going to do that this week. And what I'd like you to do is just kind of go through the team, much like we did for every other team, and give us your thoughts on each one of the players, your overall kind of perspective on the team. And Joe and I will actually get in there and add our 2 cents at the end.
Okay. Looking at this roster, guys, I think that this is a team that has the potential, and I would put into a category of being on the rise. And I say that, and I look at the starting lineup here. You have Grandal at catcher, who, by all accounts, is a player on the rise at a thin position. He started out the year very strong. He's playing for a good team and organization. I think that bodes well for that position. There are some older players, though. There are some question marks. Hosmer at first. You have to wonder, will he continue to be productive, especially for a situation where he could be trade bait or, not necessarily in a winning situation right now. Likewise, infield positions. You have Jose Ramirez at third base for the Tribe, and VR at shortstop. Tons of steals, but not exactly the guys who have high name recognition or are on many people's elite level or even very good level positional rankings. Andrus, again, solid. He's a star, and he's young, and he looks like he'll be somebody they can build around for the future. Schwarber in the outfield, tons of potential, made a big splash, but coming off an injury. In addition, fighting for playing time. We've talked about Joe Madden and how that might wreak havoc on owners of Cubs, and so you have to wonder about that. Pair of buckos in the outfield, Polanco and Marte, both young, both in stable situations with long-term deals, staying with the Pirates, both with tons of upside, though, but question marks, right? Because Polanco started off the year so well last year, kind of faded down the stretch. Marte, solid, but what is he? Is he a speed guy? Is he a power guy? Is he a five-tool guy? It's kind of hard to determine. Jake Lamb, had an emerging year last year, and I think is a solid player. Looking at the bench, that's where I start to see a lot of things, mostly that bode well for the future. Tommy Joseph, um, Joey Gallo, Dansby Swanson, and Piscotty. Four guys on the bench right now who I think would be, any player in the league would want to have those guys on their team and would be starting for many people. And so you look at that. There are some relics on the bench, though, of course, and on the disabled list. David Wright. I mean, my God, I can't remember the last time he played. I think I was in high school. Um, and then you look at the minor league system. It's again, it's full of really good prospects with Buxton and Meadows, Moncada. So Reese McGuire, some really good things to build on. It just seems like this team is super solid in some areas with a lot of upside, but then has some question marks in others.
Yeah, this is clearly a team that is in full rebuilding mode, right? Like you talk about Marte and Polanco, definitely like them. Schwarber, an interesting player. You talked about him last week. and the mix and where you think he, may be a platoon candidate, but Hosmer, that's a guy that doesn't really excite me at all. Ramirez, interesting guy, a little older. Still, I think you're right. I think you're on it. You've got Dansby Swanson, you've got Moncado, you've got Joey Big Nuts Gallo, you've got Jorge Alfaro, Moncada, even Jake Bowers is an interesting Tampa Bay prospect. So I think clearly this is where Chris is going. Joe, you getting the same read on this team?
Yeah, I think so. I like Villar. Tim, you know this from the players that I've taken in the past. I always point out that a stolen base is the same as a double. So even if the guy isn't a perfect hitter, he's going to make up for it if he could steal 60 bases. It's I'm with you. I think Hosmer's getting to the point where maybe you're not going to be able to count on some of the things he's done in the past. I think Andrus is a solid player, and the two Pittsburgh outfielders I love. Schwarber, I'm just not sure where he fits into the plans there. Definitely has some interesting things on the bench. The could care less about Jay Bruce really, but
Come on, no Jay Bruce love. Now, Jay Bruce, like years ago, the way you did Jay Bruce, the way you managed Jay Bruce is you waited for those hot streaks, put him in for 2 weeks, won your 2 games, and then sat him. That was literally Jay Bruce. Jay Bruce now, I mean, I agree. I'm surprised he's even rostered. However, he we'll see what he does with the Mets full time. I think the stadium's a little tougher there than in Cincinnati. But
if somebody goes down and you have him on a hot streak, I guess it's a great player to have. Watching that Cardinals game last night, you can't not like Piscotty the way he plays the game.
Sure.
Everybody's willing to take a ball off the head.
I missed the game. What happened?
Oh, he got hit by a pitch. Didn't enjoy that too much because it was on his unpadded elbow, and came home on I can't remember the exact play, but he came home, and as he's sliding in under my catcher Contreras, the ball caroms off his ear flap, and he just kind of collapses to the ground and gets a bloody nose for his troubles.
I love it, man. Gritty players. Yep, he scored. Gritty players.
I think looking at this roster, the more I'm staring at it, I think that there's a lack of power. It's almost like a small ball roster and real baseball translated into fantasy. Not that it's completely devoid of power, but generally speaking, there's not a lot of thumpers in that lineup.
So I think all three of us are saying no to World Series on this one, and that he is building for 2019, 2020, when if these young guys develop and he keeps these young guys or trades a combination of them for a team that is hungry and ready and able in 2019, then that's where that's going. So it'll be interesting to watch. Okay, thanks guys. Okay, gentlemen, for this segment, what we'd like to do is take a look at the podcast predictions. So Joe, Greg, myself, Tim, we're going to be saying who we think is going to win the division and make it into the playoffs. and who do we think will win the World Series. And the way the juiceless divisions are set up is we have a champions division that has 4 teams in it. These are the teams from the previous year's playoffs. And then we have the A division and the B division. We may run a contest to rename those divisions, but at this point, it's A division, B division with no value attached to the letters. So in the champions division, we can have one champion and then the potential of a wild card coming out of there. So maximum, there would only be 2 teams coming out of the champions division. And but that wild card can come from any one of the 3 divisions. So we have, the wild card could come from A division, could come from B division, or it could come from the champions division. So we have the 3 division champs, one in the champions division, one in the A division, one in the B division, and then we have a wild card that could come from any one of those 3. So I think the best place to start, Greg, we'll start with you. Just give the champions of each division from your perspective and maybe a little kind of insight as to why you're picking that team to win the division. Then we'll go to you, Joe, come to me, and then we'll go through and say who we think the wild card is and why, and then we can get into some World Series predictions.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think looking at the champions division, so we have my squad, the Smokeland Pathetics, the 47 Ronin, Jacks, Wax, Packs, and Funkin' Punks. And so, it's the champions division for a reason. And so nothing has substantively changed about the champion, that being you, Tim, and 47 Ronin. So for that division, I'm going to call you as the leading candidate to win that division. That's my prediction. You look at Division A, we got the Omission Commission, the Dreamers, and Reardon Metal. We talked about in the team overviews that Omission Commission is in full-on rebuild mode. Dreamers have a lot of upside, but a lot of uncertainty, and maybe a little bit thin on the roster in terms of depth. And so, I have to pick Reardon Metal coming out of this division because they're who I picked to take it all this year. So that's what I'd go with, And then we have the B division, or as I like to call them, the old NFC West, where it's hard to get too excited about any of those teams. Sorry, everyone. But looking at it, clearly I think that Lethal Injection is the team to beat. Bad Street has some challenges, I think. St. Locash as well is in a rebuild mode with maybe not a mind to do some trading or desire or a taste for that type of trading. So looking at the roster, Lethal Injection is loaded with young talent, and I think they take that division going away.
Yeah, I think that with the A division, I think I've clearly got the best talent there, barring injuries. And I think you're spot on about those teams. The B division, I would agree that Lethal Injection is the top dog there. And given what Chris spoke about last week about not making trades, I think you touched on that. I think that there's quite a bit of potential in some of those players that he has, and he's probably going to be loath to trade them. So I don't see him making a bunch of moves. Pops will make a bunch of moves. I don't know how much he's going to get back for what he has if he goes that route. So I think Mikey is clearly the class of that division there. The Champions division, I know I said last week that I thought the World Series was going to come down between Tim and Jack, and I've sort of changed my tune on that by going back and looking at things a little bit closer. I think Tim is going to win that division again because I know he thinks he has no depth right now, but I also know he's going to correct that. I'm actually thinking that perhaps the Smokeland Pathetics might also be coming into the playoffs out of that division rather than Jack's team. they're all three good teams. They're in the, like you said, they're in that division for a reason. But pitching is 20% of the game, and I think the Pathetics have the pitching staff that they need, and that's my take.
So good take, by the way, and we could tell you were channeling the dark side in that take.
Yeah,
So
sorry about that.
So here, when I look at the Champions Division, and so side note here, Champions Division. What's important about it is that there's an extra game in the season that the champions have to play against the champions. So Greg and I, our last game of the year is against each other, and with the parity in this league, I think the schedule plays a big part in this. So coming out of the Champions Division, in my mind, it's the Pathetics. And the reason is I talked about this last week, is baseball is a marathon. And now that we're in the post-PED era, injuries play a much bigger role, which means you have to have the bodies queued up behind the starters. And you essentially have to have a bench of players that could start on any other team, or pretty damn close to that. And when I look at the depth, I think Smokeland has it. Greg, I think you've built a team, I said this last week, that I really believe has the players to do it. And, it's getting tougher and tougher for me to trade. I was shut down on 2 trades between these podcasts, and I was overpaying. So I don't know, Joe, if I'm going to be able to fill in or not. And the waiver wire, the ability to go out and find that free agent, just isn't there as much anymore. So I really think Smokeland's going to walk away with it. In the A division, this is one where it was fascinating for me to break down. And I actually went in and looked at the schedules. And when I saw, if I take a look at the last 3 games, Joe, that you have to play with in the season. And let me just pull it up right here so I can make sure I have this right. You play Funk and Punks, you play 47 Ronin, and then in week 19 you play St. Locash. Now St. Locash, that's a pretty good one, and I think Funk and Punks, unless LJ does some major maneuvering, I think those 2 out of those 3 games probably pretty strong, and who knows, I could even be in full rebuilding mode at that point. Whereas the Dreamers, their last 3 games, they play 47 Ronin, Smokeland, Pathetics, and then Omission Commission. So if you look at those, I think the Dreamers, I think the Monday Boys, they have a tougher road at the end of the season when it counts. It counts the same as the beginning of the season, but I think when you're coming in that home stretch, if you're not coming in hot, you don't have most of your team there, that's going to be tough. And I think that's a big hill to climb. He does have Omission Commission for the last game of the year, so if it comes down to that, I think it's just whoever's team is better. So in that case, I'm going with Reardon Metal to come out of the A division. With the B division, I spent about 30 seconds kind of breaking this down, simply because I think Pops and I think Chris are both focusing on building for the future, whereas Mikey has the talent that plays right now. And if he just doesn't get snake bit, doesn't have a challenge with the things that he's had in the past, injuries specifically, I think he'll be fine. If he does have injury challenges, there's not a lot of depth there. That could be a fascinating division where you have 3 teams not wanting to make the playoffs and be in the Champions Division next year. So I don't know. I don't know how that plays out. So those are my 3 champions in my opinion. So Greg, wild card, who are you picking?
That's a tough call. I mean, I think that the Dreamers have a chance at a wild card, but I think more realistically, the wild card is going to come out of the Champions Division if we don't beat each other up too much. Nothing would surprise me. I say it's going to come down to Jack and I. And again, I just have, I have a feeling that this might not be my year, so I'm going to go with Jack.
Okay. Wow. Thank you. Joe?
I think that it's going to be Smokeland with the wild card.
Yeah, so I went with Smokeland winning the division, and I actually think the Dreamers take the wild card. I think we have two playoff teams from the A division. I think the Champions division is just too tough to kind of come through that. There's just a lot of competition there, and I think having Omission Commission in your division just really does make a difference when it comes right down to it. So World Series prediction. I to me, Greg, I think this is your year. I think Smokeland takes it. I don't want to curse you, but I really like the way your team's constructed, and I know that week 5, week 6, we may look back at this and say, you know what, we really read this the wrong way, but I've been pretty good at predicting at least the playoff teams in the past. And I really like the way your team looks. My preseason prediction is Smokeland takes it all finally, and you get that trophy. And you remember, flags fly forever. So
that's right. Yeah, as far as World Series prediction, I'm going to stick to my instincts, and I'm going to say that Reardon Metal, it's versus Reardon Metal versus 47 Ronin, with Reardon Metal unseating the champion.
Well, I'll certainly hope you're right.
You say that a lot, Joe.
Well, the one time I did win, it was against you. So, and I would not mind that repeating itself. Well, I think that boy, I tell you what, it's the. All right, let me. I'm still thinking about this because I've changed my mind on who I thought the two teams out of that division were, and I know I said I thought Tim was going to win it all, but boy, the two of you actually, I think, are going to be in the World Series, and it's going to be whoever makes the moves they need to do to get through the season. And I've seen you both do that, and I think I'm I got to stick with my first pick, Tim. I think 47 Ronin are gonna take it again. I know Tim's being modest about what he's going to be able to do during the season, but I think as he senses the desperation and the blood in the water from the teams that feel like they're out of it, he's going to go make those moves. I think he's also right in that it's becoming much harder to do, which is what everybody wanted. And boy, we've got it.
When you have more 16-year-olds on teams than 36-year-olds, that this league is a deep league. I mean, so it is really difficult to go out there and get that replacement level player, certainly out on the waiver wire. So then it really comes down to a trade. And the other part of it is that I love rebuilding. I really do. So I'm in a good spot, but I appreciate the confidence, and we'll see how it goes. So if we took a look at this, right, potential surprises or things that would surprise other people that you've been thinking about as you look at teams. So, for example, I think for me, I take a look at, say, the Omission Commission, for example, and heavily influenced by the first couple of days of the season. Omission Commission just shot out, and AJ Pollock is tearing it up, and he's got a great pitching staff, and his couple days in, suddenly I'm thinking, man, what if Scotty has, he's in full rebuilding mode, but man, he's got something, he catches fire, he's seen something that we haven't seen. I think that's a team that, interestingly enough, could surprise some folks, maybe not make it into the playoffs, but damage someone else getting into the playoffs. So I think Omission Commission is going to be an interesting team to watch. Not that Greg's team isn't going to be interesting to watch or anyone else's team. I mean, Greg's obviously got a team that we expect to win large majority of the games. But Omission Commission, and I think in that division in particular, given Joe, your team and the Dreamers, that could be a fascinating division to watch. I don't know. What do you guys think? Any surprises that you think may happen or?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it'll happen, but looking at the Dreamers, we talked about it last week. They just have so many unknowns in terms of service level and experience, and it's hard to project out. They don't have 3-year rolling averages for 2/3 of their starting lineup, but those starting lineup that they do, the small sample sizes that they do have, are phenomenal and super exciting. And so I think that if those guys live up to their potential and don't regress, I think that could be a team that could crush people and just run away with things.
Yeah, you talked about that last week when you were saying, look, I don't know how to discount this team because, like you're saying, the 3-year averages don't make sense. And if he does hit, heck, if he hits on 3/4 of them, it really could be a heck of a team.
Oh my gosh! I mean, Gary Sanchez. You have 150 at bats on this guy, but if that was even kind of real, and then Story and Seager and Peterson, if those guys are all the real deal, what you got in Freeman and Donaldson and Yelich, but if those other guys are the real deal, then that's going to be a crazy good lineup.
And they have the Mets pitching staff. So
yeah,
it's again, that is a fascinating division. And Joe, I'm sorry, you're in that freaking division.
Well, you know what? That's why I didn't pick myself to go all the way. There's you're absolutely right. I mean, there's plenty of interesting things. I mean, if you look at the scores right now, I'm in last place in that division. Scotty's got 20 scored, and the Dreamers have 18.7, and I'm lagging behind. So we could all be wrong. You gotta be lucky with points against.
Yeah,
that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's important, and just the quirk of our pitching. It's a weird kind of, you got to get some wins to get some points up early in pitching, early in the week, and pitching can come in later in the week. That there is a kind of a weirdness to that I totally agree. Could make a difference. So I don't know.
It'll be interesting to see, like with these younger players on the Dreamers and on our other teams. A lot of these guys, we've gotten into the habit of baseball, seeing players called up on May 1st or June 1st to avoid that Super 2 status. And so I can't help but wonder, what the length of the season might do to some of these players. Are they going to be prepared to be playing in this April weather? Or conversely, might they fade down the stretch? I think that's a storyline that'll be interesting to follow for the teams that are depending upon younger players to contribute at heavy levels.
So Gary Sanchez, for example, right? You keep bringing him up because it's so hard. He plays a physically demanding position. He's only played for what essentially was a quarter of the season last year.
Sure. Yeah.
And they're not going to spell him like some of the better catcher hitters by letting him play first base, because you've got Greg Bird there and you've got Chris Carter. So the idea that, Sanchez could be, the second coming, there is a lot of contrary evidence that goes against the or potential. I don't know if it's evidence, but if you took a contrarian look at it and said, hey, conventional wisdom is Sanchez is the number 2 catcher in the league. There's a lot of things in baseball. I mean, baseball is a brutal sport, and people laugh when I say that, but it physically and mentally wears people down. And I mean, I remember playing in Little League, and I had my 15 game schedule, and it was taxing. But can you 162 games a year? That's brutal.
Well, that's why I said what I did about the young Cubs players, because they not only played the 162 game schedule, they played a full postseason too, and then they've been running around doing talk shows and being fed it at every opportunity, and who knows, how much of a toll that took on them going into this year.
Right.
Yeah, and if you get a guy like Sanchez, it happened to Polanco last year. Great first half, and like everyone who loves baseball, you look at statistics and you project those out. Okay, so he's on pace to do this, on pace to do that. It's going to take a brave manager to make a different roster decision. Thinking that a guy is fading in July 1st, and if Sanchez is hitting 340 on June 30th, he might still be hitting 310 on August 1st, but that means he's had a terrible July.
Right.
And so you have to have the fortitude to make those good decisions.
Okay, so we're going to take a break here, and we'll come back, and we're going to talk a little more about baseball, something maybe a little beyond fantasy, and what was it that brought us to baseball. Okay, so what I'd really like to know, Joe, Greg, and I'll even talk a bit about it too, is what was it that brought you to baseball? What initially kind of lit that connection, that fire for this game? I worry about this game. I worry about the game not meaning a lot to the younger generation. I have two boys that could care less about baseball, and that's really tough for me because I have such a deep relationship with this game. And so I'd be really interested to find out what it was that first attracted you, brought you into it. Was it a moment? Was it just kind of a period? Was it a particular season? And then secondly, what we'll do is really, how has fantasy baseball changed your relationship to the game? It certainly has to me. So I'd be really interested in finding out how it's changed the relationship for you. So Greg, what was it that really kind of initially started that love affair that you have with this game?
It was a couple of things. Growing up in suburban Pittsburgh in the 70s, the We Are Family era Pirates were an ever-present presence in my life. But, at that age, it's more about activity as opposed to fandom. And so really what really got me thinking about the Pirates and being a fan was the fact that my next door neighbor was a Pirates clubhouse attendant. And so one day, out of the blue and unprompted, he presented me an autographed baseball of the 1977 Pirates. I remember that ball. It was signed in red ink.
Wow.
And all the Pirates' names on it. And, that really just, they went from being a kind of a nameless, faceless identity Pittsburgh Pirates to I started seeing the names of real people. And so that led me to be curious about who they were and how they were individually performing. It was that initial interest was further stoked when I became a newspaper delivery boy at the ripe old age of 10 for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And so every day, rain or shine, 365 days a year, my best friend and I would deliver newspapers. But we would always start by looking at the box scores from the previous day. And not just the box scores for the Pirates, but we looked at each and every box score, and we had a conversation every day about the favorite players that we had that we were following. It was that ability to kind of track and see the progress of your favorite players, something to look forward to every day. Unlike other sports, football's a weekly occurrence, hockey's an intermittent occurrence, but baseball was an almost daily comfort and something that I could look forward to seeing what my favorite teams and my favorite players did on a daily basis.
I ask you, how old were you when you received this signed baseball?
9 or 10.
So at 9 or 10, did you just want to go out and play one day, and that was the only baseball you could find and just play with it?
That's absolutely right. That's
oh man, like what is it with us? Why do we? I knew it. Because I would have done the same thing, right?
Absolutely. It survived, but it had a few grass stains. But yeah, absolutely. I was like, yeah, you know what? I will be very careful. And so my best friend and I, that same best friend, we would throw it around the backyard. When we'd hit a ball over our neighbor's fence, or we'd lost a ball, it was like, hey, you know what? Desperate times call for desperate measures. You got to play.
That's great.
That is an awesome story, by the way, and kind of like an all-American story. It almost, just newspaper boy reads the box scores, gets a signed ball. It's right out of Hollywood. That's beautiful. So how has fantasy baseball? Now you're a big Stratomatic guy, right? So
absolutely.
So that your first kind of, when you think about fantasy, right? This kind of whole kind of different world built
around. Yeah, it
around.
was, that same friend and I, as much fun as we had seeing how our favorite players performed through the box scores, Stratomatic baseball turned that enjoyment, that love of the statistics of the game, turned it into an activity for us so we could play. And so, it was a great, enjoyable game, but it was he and I that were the only two baseball nerds that we knew. But fantasy sports and fantasy baseball in particular, it's fun in and of itself, but it's also very grounding to my childhood. And it's just, it's all the things I loved about baseball as a kid, I still love about baseball. And it's that monotonous, ever-present aspect of baseball that draws me to it.
So cool. That is so cool. Thanks, Greg. Joe,
sure.
What was it that hooked you, that got you into baseball?
Well, it was my grandfather, actually, who you and I have talked about on the porch numerous times. I was born in Massachusetts, but I grew up an Army brat, so baseball and my grandfather and all the things that revolved around that. He was a Red Sox fan, and so I was sort of born into it. He took me to my first game. Couldn't tell you what year it was. We were, if you've been to Fenway Park, they have those obstructed view seats behind the girders that
familiar.
Hold up the,
yes,
the
very familiar with those.
And not only that, I was a kid, so I would have to lean around people to see, and if the ball went to second base, I was screwed. I wouldn't see the play because the girder was blocking second base. But I do remember that a player named John Kennedy, who was a rookie that year, he was an infielder, hit an inside the park home run. And that was just the coolest thing I had ever seen. I'd watched a million games on TV before that, but I'd never seen an inside the park home run. Didn't really see that one either because everybody was standing up, but I stood on my seat and I could catch glimpses of him running. And my grandfather had a long history with baseball. He actually got offered a contract to play in the minor leagues with the Boston Braves. He was a pretty good shortstop by all accounts. And he turned it down because he was making more money at the SS Kresge Company, and he had 7 brothers and sisters to raise because both of his parents were gone. So he never actually got to play the game professionally, although he was probably good enough to have done it on some level.
It's amazing, right? Just the emotional connections to this game.
Well, absolutely, and it's also for me growing up as an Army brat. You we're in a new place every year, and the universal language is, "Oh, do you like baseball? I like baseball. What's your favorite team?" And you would build friendships out of this, and then you'd play on the post team, and it was all part of that. You'd go outside with your ball and your bat and your glove, and you'd find some other kids around the neighborhood, and you'd go play. It was just what you did on any given day after school, or on a Saturday when your mother kicked you out of the house at 8 o'clock and said, "Don't come back until lunchtime."
So this connection you have with the game, fantasy sports. How has fantasy baseball specifically altered your connection to the game, or enhanced it, or I don't know, I can't imagine that it lessened it, but and this is something interesting because you've been playing for, this is your 9th season, so almost a decade now of actually managing a fantasy baseball team. So I'm sure it's had some impact.
Absolutely. I pay much more attention, never paid attention to minor league players before. I think I've said that previously, but it's you have to in this league if you want to survive. And it's certainly made me think about the value of a given player in a much different way. If you've just my experience, of course, is being a Red Sox fan, but looking at, okay, here's this older veteran. Is it, I know for my real team he's valuable because he has experience, but it does nothing for me in fantasy. And of course, David Ortiz was the exception to the rule. He was more valuable the older he got, but that's the outlier. That you can't be precious about these players in this game. You have to. I'm still struggling with that. Hell, Pujols is still on my team. What's he, 150 now?
Still hitting.
He is. But that's actually a great example, because if he doesn't play at first base this year, then how valuable is he to me? I can probably find those points in a much younger player that's going to serve me better over time at some point.
Deepened your awareness of the farm systems, and
absolutely,
and it sounds like it's more than just the Red Sox farm system, right? So it's broadened your.
I'll never get any Red Sox players from their farm system because you snap them up as soon as they're born.
Well, it's been pretty much depleted now, so have at it. Go go for it. Well, I think for me, baseball, I actually liked playing baseball more than I really felt connected to any particular team. However, in 1975, Fred Lynn came, blasting onto the scene. And so here's this guy who, played it the way I played it. When, here I am, I'm not even 10 yet. And there's a guy that's just playing with reckless abandon. He's running, his helmet's flying off when he goes around the bases. And so when I played Little League in my dungarees and T-shirt with the plumbing company name on it, I would tip my hat back when I was on first base so that it would fly off when I was running. And for me, it was this whole I am Fred Lynn-like connection. And so it was this really neat kind of way to play the game. And it was very difficult for me for many, many years to sit and watch a baseball game. My ADD just would not allow me to do it. I'd constantly be attracted to sports that had more action, more activity. And baseball is a sport that is that kind of writes itself out in a novel format as opposed to a sitcom format, right? And so I'm not surprised that both of you as writers had this connection and really bought into the narrative and understood it, and were really enriched by it. I really struggled with it. So when I came to fantasy sports in my mid 20s, it was a very different way of looking at the game, and it engaged me, and I could engage with it from an analytical perspective as well as really expanding and being able to watch any game at any time and thinking, hey, that guy's in our league, or I have him, or who could he potentially be on my team? So I was able to fall in love with the game on a much deeper level. At the same time, I'm playing this fantasy sports game, and this book Moneyball comes out, which is written by a financial writer, Michael Lewis, on how the Oakland A's. What am I saying? You guys freaking know. So the whole idea here, though, is this different way of looking, of finding success in a way, in a manner that was unusual. And then I was just hooked, and I thought, wow, I can use these thoughts, these principles, in such a way to kind of express and play in this fantasy baseball game. And from there, really started to get into scouting and what the scouts do. And then came across different materials in my kind of just constant search for information about young players and farm systems and prospects. Came across this amazing podcast called Up and In that was phenomenal. And it was two guys that had the same kind of twisted passion for a segment of the game of baseball that it just meshed perfectly. And so, were it not for fantasy baseball, I don't know that I would be as big of a fan of the game as I am. And I actually think that professional leagues should embrace fantasy sports to the max, because I think it opens up an entirely different avenue for people to look at, to understand, to appreciate, and to play the game at a level that isn't just physical, like we have when we were kids. I mean, I don't know. Joe, I know you and I have talked about this a lot with fantasy as kind of opening up doors that we just didn't even know existed. Were you aware of that, Greg, when you were playing Stratomatic, or was that just a neat game that kind of gave you an alternative reality at a time when alternative realities were really easy to slip into?
No, I mean, it definitely gave me an alternative. That's what I love about baseball. It's a game within a game, and Pirates fans suffered, but so did Red Sox fans. Years of not winning, and so in many other sports, that's an absolute barrier to being a fan, is the lack of winning. But in baseball, there were so many mini battles every day. And so, you know what? I might not be able to cheer my Pirates to victory or have any reasonable hope that they're going to do anything good. But the players that I was personally invested in, that starting pitcher that I loved, every 5 days I got to, root for him to win. He got to win. I got to root for my favorite players to make an all-star team, or to win a batting title, or to be the league leader in doubles, or whatever it may be. There's a lot of things to cheer in baseball. And I will tell you, Tim, and I've never revealed this to you, that if my best friend were on this podcast right now and you asked him who was Greg's unquestioned favorite player as a child, whose number did Greg wear for every sports team that he ever played, he would answer instantly, Fred Lynn.
No way.
Absolutely.
No way.
That's
So 1975, 333 batting average, 39 home runs, 125 RBIs.
It was amazing, wasn't it? It was
That was an amazing rookie season. Yeah, amazing.
I mean, he's so you think about so think what you will about the Red Hot Chili Peppers, okay? Seminal band. If you listen to music in the 90s, like the Peppers were the shit, right? And my belief is that their best album is Blood Sugar Sex Magic, by far. Like everything else leads up to that or is a denouement from that. And but it's an interesting thing because, Joe, I think you and I have done this, right? We've applied the Blood Sugar Sex Magic model to many other artists, music or other, right? And so you think about Fred Lynn released his Blood Sugar Sex Magic like in his fucking rookie year. Like he could never match that. This is a 50-win player over the course of his career, but yet his single greatest moment in his career was as a rookie. Like, and there's something about that is just so tragic. I mean, no, it's not. I don't know if it's tragic, but it does not have the build up and the the crescendo, and then maybe kind of walking off into the sunset. I mean, it's like boom right there,
Well,
right up.
can you imagine what they would say about a player like? I mean, who parallels that today? Somebody that's come into the league in the last 10 years and had
Bryce Harper,
career.
Mike Trout,
Well, I'm just saying, had that magical rookie year and then never quite lived up to it again.
Yeah, I mean, you look at like Nomar, Garcia Parra, through injury and so forth. He had more than just that one good year. But,
right.
Yeah. I always think of who was the Red Sox first baseman that they put in for defensive purposes, or that they should have put in for Buckner. Was it Stapleton? I think Dave Stapleton. He played for at least 10 years, and his average got lower every year that he played.
Well, an even more extreme example, I was telling Tim the other day, I watched a great, I think it was an ESPN piece on Rick Ankiel.
Oh, yes.
And, that guy was, the top pitching prospect, and he lived up to it that rookie year, and then he caught Steve Blass disease. And, and God admirably fought back to the majors and had a good, productive career. Was my first pick overall in my expansion year draft, by the way. But his mother was interviewed, and she talks about, like, even though he had a great career and made millions of dollars, that part of him died because he couldn't replicate the huge success that he felt was within his grasp.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing, guys. That I really appreciate hearing that and learning that, Greg, that we have Fred Lynn in common. How awesome is that?
Number 19,
Okay, so we're going to take a break, and we'll come back and talk about the most impactful movie in our lives. Okay, well, gentlemen, let's take this final segment. It'd be really interesting to know what the most impactful movie of your life has been. It could be a baseball movie, it could be a non-baseball movie. Just really interested in a movie that really impacted you as a human being. So, Joe, I'm going to start off and ask that of you.
All right. Well, I actually thought about this quite a bit today. And my first choice, I realized, couldn't possibly have been impactful in my life because I couldn't remember what year it came out. So I rejected that. And I would have to say it was Star Wars. Big science fiction fan, and it was the first movie I saw when we moved back to the United States. We'd been living in Germany for 3 years, and our culture consisted of AFN, which is Armed Forces Network, and in the midst of things like Charlie's Angels being popular and Starsky and Hutch, we were watching reruns of Bonanza and things like that if you wanted to watch American TV. And so we just weren't getting pop culture there. And we came back to the States in the summer of '77, and everybody was talking about this great movie. And we spent our month in Massachusetts at my grandparents' house, and we moved out to Fort Leavenworth, which is close to Kansas City. And so that was, we decided to go in. There wasn't a theater in Leavenworth that was showing it. It was too small. So we had to go to Kansas City to see it. And just the opening scene of that, watching that scroll go off into the distance, and the special effects, the story itself was just amazing. It was like, this is great. I'm so happy to be home, wherever home is right now. It wasn't home, but it was the U.S. And I can remember having a conversation amongst the family on the way home about, what was that about? Why did they do this? Why was this character named this?
And wait, you were asking that, or they were asking you?
We were all talking about it. My father, of course, was leading the discussion, because that's just kind of what he did. And I had never actually thought about things like that watching a movie before. It was the first one where we actually, probably the first time we'd gone to a movie as a family in years. The Post Theater at in the one time we were stationed on post in Germany, the 1 year that we didn't live on the economy, so to speak, was a bad year for movies. I don't remember anything good coming out of it. My parents never found anything they wanted to go to, at least with the kids. So that was a real treat to do that. Obviously it was a great movie. Unless you just hate that sort of thing, but.
Joe, I agree with you. That was a huge movie for me as a kid too, and I'm the youngest of 6. I think every one of my brothers and sisters took me to see it, and I saw it probably another half a dozen times in the theaters with friends. And those days, once a movie was out of the theaters, I couldn't conceive of a way that I would ever see it again.
Well, yeah, of course not.
There was no videos. I never thought that they would ever broadcast it on television. So I convinced my mom to buy me the soundtrack album on vinyl.
Yeah.
And every day after school, I would lie on the living room floor, the big family Wi-Fi in front of that, and I would play that soundtrack album. And I would close my eyes, and I would try to the best of my ability to re-see the movie in my mind's eye, cued solely by that soundtrack album.
Did the exact same thing. I still have them, actually. They had trading cards for Star Wars, much like baseball cards, and I used to buy those all the time. I was just so into that. It was a wonderful movie.
It was.
I haven't watched it in years, and I'm kind of afraid to, because I'm afraid it doesn't hold up to what I think it was.
I was going to ask you, and I thought, nah, that's a shitty question. Like, what a lame question. So to hear you say that, because I have my own thoughts on how well or it did or didn't age, but I'd be interested to, if and when you ever do, that you let me know. Because
what scared me off of it is I watched the Monty Python movie years ago with Andrew, my son, and it just wasn't as funny as I remember it. So, yeah. What are you going to do?
Excellent. Thank you. I think all of us are at an age where Star Wars was, I can remember going to the theater. Obviously, Greg shared with you, his relationship to it. A freaking great movie. And it's good versus evil, man. That means something to me. Greg, I'm interested in the most impactful movie. I know we've had a chance to talk a lot, but I don't know that I have any idea where you're going with this.
Yeah, that's a tough question to boil something down. I have a lot of favorites for different reasons, but if pressed, I would say that it's Casablanca. And for me, it was all about the possibility of a life beyond suburbia, and I had a great childhood. It was many ways idyllic, and I'm not certainly bashing suburbia, but maybe I am about to bash suburbia, but it was kind of a banal existence, and to see somebody, Bogart was unlike any person I ever knew or met or even saw on the streets. He was sophisticated. He was cool. He was in command, and he was living in this melting pot, very exotic environment. So on the surface, all of those things appealed to this kind of sheltered suburbanite very much. But then, on a deeper level, there was the backdrop of history, and probably, I think inarguably the greatest evil that our race or the human race has ever encountered. And so, to see somebody in such a stylish way squaring off against that evil was compelling to me. And then, it was just so much depth to that movie that I think a lot of people don't notice. Every character in that movie had redeeming qualities. Some more than others, but it was a collection of people who were really admirable in dealing with their circumstances, and and it was unlike any collection of characters that I'd ever seen in any other kind of a story. And so it really affected me, and it made me think that, wow, there's such a world of possibility that I'm unaware of, but that I'm going to tap into.
How old were you when you saw that?
I was probably early teens, 12, 13 years old.
Okay,
when for the first time I sat down to watch it.
So now I've known you for a long time, Greg, and I know that, and I've said this to you, you're a very deep person, and there's a lot of complexity there, and it's fascinating. But to be that young and to really kind of understand that movie, I mean, there's a lot of themes in that movie that go way beyond anything I was thinking about when I was 12. That's wild. And so has that kind of, I mean, that must have kind of shaped, I mean, just your whole adolescence and like teenager into young adulthood. I mean, these are epic. That's an epic film with a.
Yeah, no, not to be overly dramatic, but no, it certainly did. It, the narrative structure that's kind of hardwired into our DNA is boy meets girl, they fall in love, and they live happily ever after. And to have that so beautifully disrupted, where boy meets girl, they fall in love, but then because of forces greater than them, they consciously decide to sacrifice their own happiness in the service of something bigger. That's mind blowing, and and expanding. And so, yeah, that I don't know if it was a completely linear path, but then reading books, like For Whom the Bell Tolls, or reading Siddhartha, and starting to look into Buddhism and Joseph Campbell and Greater Consciousness. It was definitely a departure point of sorts for me on a path of appreciating sophistication and that balance between that and humanism.
Phenomenal, and I really wish I had gone before you. I mean, because
Sister Act 2.
Yeah, this is just gonna. So when I think about impactful, right? For me, a lot of the same things, right? Grew up, suburbia, lower middle class. Really wanted to get out of there. Felt kind of hemmed in quite a bit, and I remember I was a young kid. I probably around the same age, 11 or 12. And was hanging out, staying over at Brian Delano's house, my friend Brian Delano. And it was always fun because Brian Delano's parents were divorced, and he was living with his mom, and his mom was pretty kind of laissez-faire. So, hanging out with Brian meant you could pretty much do whatever the hell you wanted. And we went out to the movies, and we saw Saturday Night Fever. But we saw the R-rated version of Saturday Night Fever, right? Now, this is pre-internet. This is pre- anything. And so here I am, and freaking the opening scene, and Tony Monero's walking down the street, and the music's just cranking. And, this is a whole story about a guy in a nowhere life And then when he crosses that bridge and really kind of, goes clubbing, like he's this, there's this whole nother world he goes into, and I immediately connected with him. And again, here it is. I was too young to be seeing an R-rated movie, and there is a hell of a sex scene in there that I know stayed with me for many years. But the idea was that, man, this is awesome. Like, adulthood is fucking great, and how am I going to make that happen? And so I got to tell you, man, I can't dance worth a crap. And although I do like music with a groove, that's never changed. But that's a movie that really kind of did two things for me. One, made me think that growing up is freaking awesome. And number two, that, hang in there, because there is that opportunity. You're going to have that opportunity, Tim, to cross the bridge yourself. And frankly, I did as fast as I could. I grew up in New England, but I turned 18. I got the hell out of there, and really kind of crossed that bridge myself. But shit, I had to follow you, like with that, Greg. I mean, come on, man.
No, but Saturday Night Fever, like Star Wars, it was a cultural phenomenon. It set fashion trends. The Bee Gees set music trends. It spawned, a whole cultural phenomenon. It was a great movie, and you look back at it now, and it's like a time capsule of that era.
It is a time capsule of that era. And go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say, the good part for you is that chicks still dig that music. I don't know chicks that dig Star Wars. So you got that going for
you. You were in the wrong generation, Joe, because I think the kids today are totally embraced that. But so good stuff, and really neat stuff. I mean, Joe, I've known you for 20 years. Greg, I've known you for what, 12? 11 years. So
yeah,
pretty awesome.
So if you had to name a sports movie or a baseball movie, what would it be? Either one of you.
For me, it'd be The Natural. And if you'd asked me this time last year, I probably would have said Field of Dreams. But I've been watching The Natural. Has been on some rotation on cable. And I realized how much I really love that movie, and I have an interest in like Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey and that sort of thing. And that movie really is, I love the history, I love that era of baseball, but man, it is deep, and it is deep on a level of like that hero's path to redemption.
Yeah. What about you, Tim? Did we lose?
Geez, there's gosh, I am a sucker for, I'm definitely a sucker for a good sports movie, for sure. Like, I will absolutely,
was it going to be Slapshot?
Well, no, Slapshot. Now, come on, now, Slapshot is actually a really good movie. And I think we just passed. What was it? We just passed. Was it the 30-year anniversary? That Slapshot? Was it 30 or 40? It was 40, right? 40.
Memorial. Johnstown Chiefs did a memorial game and brought the Hanston brothers to the arena.
Yeah, I think it was 40. For me, I love the movie Invincible. Right? To me, that was, Vince Papale. Again, I guess this freaking, having grown up in Boston, and, relating these, it's a New York and a Philly guys. I love the fact that that he was undaunted, and that he kept getting knocked down and just got back up. And to me, that is something that resonates with me on every level. And it just reinforces, what grit does for somebody and what they're able to do, and your ability to get back up. What's the Japanese saying, right? Get knocked down 6 times, get up 7. And to see that played out, and just to spend an hour and a half kind of working through that with the character, emotionally being invested. So for me, it was, I would say Invincible.
What
about you, John?
Yeah, I would have to be Field of Dreams for me. Just the fact that it's Red Sox centric. It's got the literary element to it. I lived in the Midwest for a long time, and there really are people like that out there. That's just it was a neat story, and just the whole at the end when he's playing catch with his dad. I just remember as a kid, every chance I would get, I would play catch with my grandfather. It was one of the things he loved to do the best, and I'd always have my Red Sox hat on, and he'd grab his, and we'd just go out in the backyard and have a pass, as he called it.
It's awesome. A beautiful story. It definitely is.
I cried like a baby.
I cried a lot of sports movies. I'll tell you guys a deep sleeper if you're ever looking for a tear-jerking sports movie from the past. The Jericho Mile.
Oh yeah, I remember that one.
Peter Strauss, runner in prison. It's a great movie.
Well, hey, great segment, guys. I really appreciate it. That was very illuminating for me, and I appreciate you sharing some stuff that I didn't know about you. And with that, we're going to wrap this episode up, and looking forward to next week. I think next week we'll talk about some of the results of the first week, maybe some surprises, early surprises. Does it change our predictions? I don't think it does, but maybe it does. And hopefully we'll have the fourth amigo, Jack, back so that he can participate as well. So thanks, guys. Love you a bunch, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Chewie, is that you? Chewbacca!